Good morning, everyone. My name is Bernie Siegel, and as you know, I'm the Executive Director. Pay attention. Connie, the panel is out of control. We're going to start this. You know, this is being taped to an audience of millions. All right. All right. So let's get this organized. The famous book, The Last of the Mohicans. So I look out at this group of early risers this morning, and I realize you are the last of the Mohicans, those that work their way through the final day of a busy, crowded three-day event, right? Get the best pearls of wisdom. And I want to welcome you all to this very interesting session that we decided to develop and the RegMed Capital Conference, and modestly declared it, Dare to be Great, turning your lab research into thriving commercial enterprise. And I'm looking over the folks in the room. I think many of you have already turned your lab research into thriving commercial enterprises. One of the reasons when you have a 7-track conference such as this, we do tape as much of it as we can, and these lectures and presentations are made available to our community and to the public in general at no cost, because we feel that we share knowledge and build coalitions and expand knowledge by doing this. As an advocacy-driven organization, one of the great challenges in the 13 years that we've done this, and this is the 11th year of the World Stem Cell Summit, is we found the field is like peeling an onion. The more you get into it, the more complex it is. And the field is no longer just about research and research funding and what we can do and what we can't do as researchers, but how is this really going to be delivered to the public as medicine? How are these innovative technologies really going to get into use? And there's the intersection of business and industry and lab research, and how companies are funded, and how lab work can be turned into successful commercial enterprises, not only to benefit the researchers, but it's not all about the researchers striking it rich and spending the rest of their time walking the beaches around the world, relaxing on golf courses. It's really, how is this going to work that it really gets done? And the experienced speakers that are here on this podium today are not just going to give lectures. This is a conversation of which I hope those in the audience will share your own experiences, successes, failures that might not be your own personal stories, but stories of others, to be able to share. And remember that this lecture is going to be watched many, many times in the future, and I appreciate the expertise in the room and those joining us after they get their coffee in Danish, because we're starting early. Just a brief introduction, because all of these individuals are dear friends of mine and colleagues, and have worked with us in stem cell summits before. There's Chris Mason at the University College of London, and my own interactions with Chris through many years as on the Science Advisory Board of Genetics Policy Institute. Terrapin recognized him as the third most influential person in the field of stem cells, by the way, which is a pretty lofty title, so that's why I dragooned him into this panel so he could keep his ranking. But he's been someone to nurture the field and study the field, understand the critical component of cell therapies and the need of a really solid cell therapy industry group, among many of the visionary things that he's worked on. Connie Harrell is a member of the board of the Combined Genetics Policy Institute and Regenerative Medicine Foundation, and we are very thankful to have her support. She is a main advocate and proponent of a really phenomenal group that I joined called the Kerietsu Forum. The Kerietsu Forum is the largest network of accredited investors on the planet, with some 1,400 members in chapters all over the world. in major cities. So the fact that we have one of the top angel networks endorsing and working with us on this conference that we are expanding every year, the Regiment Capital Conference, is a real benefit, and Connie's going to sort of guide the conversation today. And also joining us is Griffey, who is one of the leaders of StemBioSys. Of course, StemBioSys and their founder is Dr. Steve Davis, who's in the audience, and Steve is also a member from San Antonio, who's also a member of the board of directors of Genetics Policy Institute and Regenerative Medicine Foundation. StemBioSys is coming on as gangbusters, and to me it represents, it shows you how a thriving city like San Antonio recognizes that regenerative medicine is the future, and has helped facilitate StemBioSys and propelled it as an important emerging company in the space. So the combined experience you have here in investing in life sciences and knowledgeable about the industry can certainly help all the lab people that are in the room that want to understand how they can dare to be great and be successful. So you might just choose to conduct this from your seats, but let's welcome our panel.
Thank you, Bernie.
Thanks, Bernie.
I would like to say Bernie joined Kerietsu Forum at the first of this year, and since then we're now up to 2,000 members, 40 chapters. We've added 5 chapters since you joined. So we're growing exponentially. We just opened up India. We have 3 chapters in India, Prague, and we just launched Prague last week. So we're growing strong. Thank you, Bernie. Thank you very much. And as you said, we were kind of chatting up here. It's very nice to be sitting at this table or at this panel with these 2 guys. It's pretty amazing the experience that they have in the topic that we're talking about today. And I'd like to ask a couple of questions, and then I almost want to get a big table and just put us all in a round table so we can all really, like Bernie said, have an open conversation. So if you have questions, if you have comments that you'd like to share while we're doing this, don't wait for Q&A. Let's just participate with us. So commercialization is a finite, complete life cycle from IP through full commercialization. And I'd like to ask Chris, what do you feel are the most important aspects of this process?
Thanks very much. So I think the key really is to make sure you actually have got a plan to get to commercialization from the beginning. And I think that a lot of academic groups come up with a great discovery and they think, wow, how could we do something with that? That's okay, but you have to have some idea where you're going to go and then make sure the development actually takes you down that path. So, for example, there is absolutely no point in developing something where the cost effectiveness is just never going to be appropriate. So I think part of it is making sure you plan what you're going to do. I think it's good to get a translation centre on board. Maybe your university has such a centre. UCL in London is very strong at this, but elsewhere around the world there is support from places like the CCRM in Canada, the Cell Therapy Catapult in London, and these centres are very good at actually helping academics commercialise their outputs. And so I think you need that partner, someone who can hold your hand, who's done it before, who knows the pitfalls of IP, regulation. Reimbursement's very important, the manufacturing, the clinical trial, all very complex if you've never done it before and you're a lab scientist. So I think my bit of advice is really to get involved with someone who's done it before, ideally a translation centre, and have a plan as to where you're going to go and stick to the plan.
Okay, great. Si, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure. I think, one of the things that I found really important, and I've done a couple of different types of products, both biologics and more widget medical device type things, and the technology transfer a lot of times out of a university setting or wherever that technology is coming to into a company, and thinking about early feasibility studies and then commercialization of that process or commercializing the process can be really difficult, and a lot of things change, and I think you just need to stay open-minded because there's a lot of different ways to crack a nut. So certainly you've got to have that plan, but you also, founders, those involved in the company or whoever's trying to take this thing commercial, need to be open and really think about different ways to do it, because things can change and you can still get to that end point, but if you stay too rigid sometimes, there's a lot of hurdles that you're throwing in front of yourself. I think a lot of times the way I think about it, early feasibility, you can have something that is much bigger than a bread box, and it looks like there's no way I'm ever going to make this cheap enough, small enough, et cetera, et cetera. There's usually a way to do it. There's usually a way to get there. So really keep in mind what your goal is, what your unmet need is, what you're trying to hit, what this device is supposed to do, and then move in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree for devices. I think, devices, you can drive the price down. I think cell therapies, at the moment, we've not seen that ability to get massive reduction in costs. And so you can, at this moment in time, work out, well, what is the efficacy you're likely to achieve? And is it enough to justify the cost of using a cell therapy? And often it's not. So I think you have to choose very carefully. But I agree on device, you can drive costs down. But cell therapy, we're just not there yet.
Okay. How critical is it for entrepreneurs to demonstrate that they can scale for immediate revenue with their IP? Is that a critical aspect of commercialization in this field?
How early? Well, scalability is crucial. Yeah, I agree. And in fact, we see it in this field quite a bit at the moment. So by this field, I mean cell and gene therapy. So if we look at the gene therapy, the ability to make the actual vectors to do the gene therapy, there are very long waiting lists to even get manufacturing done. And when you do get it done, it's incredibly expensive. And you can only treat maybe 5, 6, 7 patients, very small numbers, even with quite large production runs costing something like $250,000. Now, that is a big limitation if you can't scale. It's all very well you can do 4 or 5 patients for a phase 1 and proof of concept. But is that vector you've chosen and the way you're manufacturing it really going to do a market that could be thousands or tens of thousands? Possibly not. So you may want to choose your vector carefully, that it is scalable from the beginning. So I think you have to have a technology that is potentially scalable, and there are people who can help you and guide you with that.
No question. I mean, absolutely agree. It's got to be scalable, because if it's not, you're going to end up spinning your wheels trying to get enough of this stuff done. You're going to get a lot of people excited and not be able to deliver your product.
And I think the thing is, at the moment, we have lots of options for making scalable products. I mean, it may be that you decide you're going to do a cell therapy. Well, maybe the cell therapy is too expensive, but maybe because it's autologous, and maybe it's better to use a gene therapy method, which you can get sort of an allogeneic equivalent, really. One type of vector treats all. So we have a lot of scope as to how we can do some of this work now. The world's changing. The ability to add genes, edit genes, has changed the whole way we think about cell and gene therapy. And I think that enables you to really start to manipulate the price and start to drive down what your likely cost of goods could be.
I think one of the difficulties too, though, is that it's really difficult to tell when you're at the early front end what it's going to take to commercialize a process and to move it forward. You know, again, been involved in a few different programs where up front it looked like this is going to be impossible. We're just not going to get there. And you know, you bring in some experts, you talk to experts in the field, and there's usually a way to get there.
Bring in the experts. I agree.
Right.
I agree.
Don't. What I'm trying to say, I guess, is don't quelch an idea right up front because you think you can't scale it.
Bring in the experts. I totally agree on that. You want the guys who've done it before, who've got the grey hair, who've failed a few times, and also talk to the people who are actually going to do, if it's going to manufacture, and go and talk to them. I mean, quite often they've got some ideas, or they may say, well, that's just not going to scale as it is. So I think getting that expert advice, getting your SAB assembled very early, getting your peers to give you some input, and ideally some people who've done it before. Yeah, I agree. It's all about getting that input.
You do it too many times, it's not only gray hair, you lose hair.
I heard a presentation yesterday that might help you. We have a question in there.
Yeah, it's very much related to that issue of the timing when you decide that something really isn't going to work, or it's not going to be scalable, or it's, at what point, you can talk to as many experts as you want, but it's really hard to gauge when is the right time to actually call this, all right, this is the time to cut your losses and go. So how do you decide what those appropriate time codes are, and how long should you be going at something before you decide this really isn't going to pan out right now with the current technology?
Yeah, I think it's hard to put a time on that.
I guess what are some of the signals for you that might help make that decision?
Well, if I have my chief financial officer keeps coming back to me and saying, you know, we want to sell this, or that looks like the market will bear this type of price, and this is what it's costing us to produce it, we've got a problem. So you need to sit down and run through everything you can to try to get those costs down, and obviously not lose the positive effects of the product or what you're trying to do. But I think, obviously it depends on the value of what you're producing. A lot of these cell therapy products, it's really difficult to put a value on these products that are curing diseases now. So there's a lot of value there, and so the difficulty is also up front trying to determine what is the value of your product. How much can we bring back to the company from this product if it works as we think it does? So a lot of questions come up.
I think from an academic perspective, I think you want to go very early with that advice, because you can make some really bad decisions very early which can hurt you. So, for example, you might think, I've got this great therapy, I've shown that it cures XYZ in the mouse model, but you've used tons of bovine fetal albumin, for example, which adds great cost to the product and also has regulatory issues. Now, you'd want to take that out really early, and so you would want to redirect your studies at that point. So I think the earlier you can get that advice as to what the therapy is going to do, we can guess the reimbursement a bit. And I agree, we don't know exactly, because we don't know if they're cure or just very durable responses, but you're not going to know that until they're actually approved. But you can get a feel. Is it, a $1,000 product? Is it a 10,000? Is it 100,000? And then you can start to see, well, okay, this is worth developing, or actually maybe this is not so good. It's competing with a biologic. It's only slightly better than the biologic out there. It's not going to run. It's not going to fly. So that's what I would suggest, very, very early. And you can actually do it. And I would actually argue you can actually backward engineer it, and that's what we do, my group, and the Cell Therapy Catapult does in London, is when you have an idea of maybe, let's say I can cure spinal cord injury, working back from what the efficacy you could possibly achieve, the maximum efficacy, and then looking at what the price would be, and then trying to work out, well, what's the margins needed, the development times, and you can actually calculate it all the way back, and it works really well, and you can see whether is it worth doing or not.
Yes, have a question?
Following on Jennifer's question, it's much more comfortable for the lab to move to an academic expert as opposed to a commercial expert. When do you make the decision that it's time to take it out into that angel or into the VC market to get that expertise and that benchmark of value and protocol efficacy?
I think that was yours.
Yeah, I mean, actually, it's a really nice question. I think the answer is that you want to keep it in the lab as long as you possibly can and develop it with non-dilutional funding, and there's a fair bit around. I think you've got to have something that's really sorted before you go to the VC community. You can't carry on doing the R of R&D. You've got to be really at the D stage. So I think the longer you can keep it in academia, and you don't want to go too slowly, but there is enough non-dilutional funding from charities, government money, state money, to enable you to develop these therapies to a pretty advanced stage. And I think you really don't want to be looking at going out for VC money until you've probably, well, ideally you've done a few patients, you've got proof of concept in man, a little bit of safety data, but on a few patients, and maybe a hint of efficacy, good animal data, or at least starting that clinical trial. I don't think you want to go before, and I don't think you need to. I think there was enough resource around to actually do it. And then you can get real traction with the VCs and not get too diluted either.
And I think I talked with you guys the other day. I think the advice for me would be, with our angel network, was the advice that I gave you was allow me to introduce you to a couple of our investors and get their opinion on where they think you are, people who are experts in your field. If you want to go with a certain VC, if you're looking at certain VCs that you want to approach, try to get to know someone that's involved in that firm and talk with them before you actually make that presentation. I think that, and I will make those introductions. I'd like to ask everyone in the room, how many of you have taken lab research and commercialized it? Oh wow, Bernie was right.
Yeah.
So
it's good to see.
I'm going to ask you, what do you feel like is the skill set that's required of someone who is in that position to successfully commercialize their product?
take that idea to commercialization. I have found actually 4 companies. One of them is on NASDAQ in New York. The second one is private. 2 and 3, 3 and 4 are in development, I would say. And I think it's very important, based on the little experience I have, is to do as the previous speaker, stay away from VC as long as possible, because they are going to scoop you and screw you anyway they can.
They just want to make money.
Yeah.
They just want to make money.
Yeah, but I think the reason it's not, I don't think it's so much that they are the vulture capitalists so much. I think the problem is that they really want stuff that's de-risked. And there's a lot of good de-risk stuff around. So if you take something from academia where you really haven't got the data, and they're not going to reward you as well with such a good valuation. I think it's all about having that high quality data. It's what you said, the science has got to be excellent. I mean, you can't develop something unless the science base is rock solid and you really have got some sort of potential game changer. And I think with those 2 things you can develop it. So yeah, we agree, good science every time.
So aside from the people that you know who have successfully done that, what do you think the skill set is?
You know, you need a broad skill set. Speaking from experience again, the project that we're currently working on is not a cell product, but we use cells to make this matrix. And so we do a lot of cell culture. And in the technology transfer out of the university to the company, we were fortunate to get one of the researchers that was at the university to come to the company each day and help, train us how to do this. The problem was that this scientist came into the company, and each day he'd look under the microscope and look at the cells and say, well, today we're going to do this, and tomorrow we'll do this. So we'd get ready, and he'd come in the next day and he'd take a look at it and say, you know what, it's not quite ready. Let's wait one more day. So having to describe to someone, it's hard at a scientist's perspective to think about design for manufacture, I guess is one way to put it. But to think down the road that even a cell therapy type product, you need to write SOPs, and you need to be doing the same thing each day. And it's a little bit difficult with cell culture to get something that is timed, and you know each day what you're going to be doing. You're going from one donor to another. Donor to donor variability comes into play. Again, we were very fortunate to have some very smart scientists in the lab that looked at different algorithms to determine proliferation rate, so that we knew how many cells to seed based on what the proliferation rate of these cells were, so that we could go through an 18-day process and know each day this is what we were going to do. But it took us the better part of a year to figure these things out. So,
I mean that's true. I mean, I think part of it, the transfer from the university, is to have that assay when you start the company. I think the data's got to be really robust before you take it out and use VC money, because the clock is ticking and it's getting expensive. But I agree.
Jerry?
You made a comment about the CFO. When you know it's not working and the CFO keeps coming. Well, let me speak out of the CFO's perspective. I think one suggestion I'd make to all of you is get the CFO to understand what you're trying to do, and don't make a lot of promises about, oh, this is going to work quickly. One thing I've learned here is nothing happens quickly. There's going to be a lot of roadblocks in the way. Get the CFO involved so he understands the risk involved. I think that's probably true with angel investors as well. Don't oversell what you're trying to do. And if you tell them it's going to take a year to do, but you really think it's going to take 2 years, say it's going to take 2 years, and if you're able to do it in 1 year, the CFO is going to give you that 2 years to do it. And they're going to say you're actually ahead of schedule.
And everyone will be happy.
That really will help
Yeah.
you work on a project and be successful, because the last thing you want to do is pull the plug when you're still hopeful.
Yeah, agreed.
But the CFO is just naturally conservative, naturally going to say, well, you promised me this, but you didn't deliver. Therefore, it's their role to try to pull the plug on you. By getting involved earlier, they're less likely to give you the options that you can have later on when there is a roadblock. And just understanding that there are going to be a lot of roadblocks in this industry.
I agree, and I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that the time is very unpredictable. I also think the number of people you actually need to get this thing done is unpredictable. If you've never done it, you just don't realize how big, for example, a clinical trial team. What about QA and QC sign-off on your products? All these things you just never think of when you're a bench scientist. And I think the common thing is just to underestimate how big the team is and who's going to manage the team. You as the person who runs a lab is great at running the science, but not running the clinical trial and all the rest of the process of actually getting something over the line. So I would agree.
Thank you, Jerry, for adding that. With Kerietsu Forum, we look at very diverse industries, and I'm trying to get our investors to look more into stem cell and regenerative medicine. So, Chris, would you say the proof of concept can be based on empirical performance as opposed to theoretical expectations in this field?
So it's very hard. I think that the field is moving very quickly, and we're seeing more and more genetic modification, which looks really great, but it is a bit early in the life cycle of the products. Having said that, I think that what you're really asking, is the animal data strong enough to go out for funding at that stage, or do you need first-in-man studies? I would argue that if you can possibly get to first-in-man, it's really worth doing in terms of the inflection point you'll get to for an investor. You tell the investor, first of all, it's safe, and the way the clinical trials system is set up, the regulators are very kind to us, much kinder than to the biologics and the small molecules, in that because we are doing first-in-man in patients, they allow us to do escalating dose. So we start with a pathetically small dose, which we know will do nothing, but it should show safety. And during that phase 1, or safety study, as I would prefer to call it, you can ramp up to a point where you may well be seeing efficacy. So you can do a very small patient population. And if you've got a genuinely good value and something that's worth doing, cell or gene therapy, you will see efficacy at that stage, I'm absolutely certain. Maybe not full efficacy, but you'll see something. And if you're not seeing something, I would probably argue that you shouldn't continue, because these therapies are expensive to develop and expensive to manufacture. And therefore, you've really got to have something which has got a big efficacy, something that really works to make the difference. And if you're not seeing some pretty good suggestive signs during that early first-in-man, then I don't think you should be continuing. So the answer for me is, yeah, you need to get it into a proof-of-concept study, and there is a lot of money around from non-dilutional funding sources to do that.
Would you like to add anything?
Totally agree. I mean, you have to look for those inflection points, and when you think about the process, I look at a few different points, starting out with reason to believe. You've got a little bit of data, or maybe you've read something in the literature, and you think, this might actually work. We might be able to make something with this. And the next step from there is probably feasibility. So you've done a few more studies. It now looks like, hey, we can actually manufacture this thing. Maybe you've done pilot manufacturing. That's more of an inflection point probably than the previous. After feasibility, it's probably proof of concept. Now maybe you've gone into an animal model. You've actually applied this technology and got the end result that you were looking for. Still not first in man, but it's gone up. Another inflection point is you've commercialized your process. So you have manufacturing and you know that you can do this. And then finally after that, I would say it's first in man. Once you get to man, and each one of those, I mean, you've added value to your technology. You should be able to get more money for that technology when you go out and raise money, because you've hit those and de-risked your programs, as Chris says.
I think that's right. I mean, the big challenge in cell and gene is that the animal models are not particularly useful. So, if you've got a drug that has an element of immunotherapy in it, then you certainly don't want to be testing it on some immunosuppressed mouse or immunocompromised mouse, because the one thing you want is the immune system working. So we have a real problem with the animal models. And yet we know that some of these therapies are working great in the clinic. So I think pushing on to the clinic is really important. You need good safety data in your animal models, but getting early into man should be high on your list of priorities.
Do we have any questions from anyone? Anyone in the process of trying to take research into commercialization? No? Nobody's in the process right now? Do you have what is your biggest concern right now?
through the NIH,
Mm-hmm.
et cetera. But I think that defines the valley of death for us. There's a lot of clinical studies.
I think it depends when you do it. You're right. If you're a company, it is relatively tough in that space. There is NIH funding, there is funding elsewhere. That's why I'm saying keep it in academia. To do that proof of concept study or first in man in academia is easier. There's more money opportunities available to you. There's things like CERM, the charities, NIH. So that's why I think you want to keep it in academia. The clinical trial is also cheaper to do as well if you're in academia. So you keep the costs down. That's why I would recommend keeping it as an academic-sponsored study early on and getting that initial proof of concept. Then go out for your money at that point. Nothing to stop you raising money during that, treating those patients. It's going to take a year. You've got time. So I think if you go out as a company, you're actually right to do that phase 1 or initial study can be quite expensive and quite slow, because if you're going to go through NIH, it's going to take you at least 12 months to get the money.
So, Sai, would you like to add something to that based on your experience?
I think that hits it pretty well. I mean, I totally agree.
Okay.
Totally agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think the beauty of the academic units are now is that they are more and more building GMP facilities within the academic units, which are not suitable for commercial guys on the whole. Some are, but the majority are very much academic GMP units. Still good quality, still everything you need for a clinical trial. And so that you can do it in-house quite easily. I mean, we've got 5 at UCL at the moment. It enables us to get into a clinical trial pretty quickly and pretty cost-effectively. And if you look at other centres, likewise, they have their own GMP unit. Places like UPenn have done extremely well manufacturing their TCARs in academia. And only really when they got it very well sorted with great data in man did it then go to Novartis and commercial manufacture. So I think that's another reason for really keeping it in-house. Now, I must be honest, I don't know quite how the US system works, but I know a little bit more about Canada. So Canada, for example, they have 3 types of clinical trial. They have an industry-sponsored, academic-sponsored, and they have this sort of hybrid, and the hybrid is really useful. Now, I don't know if that exists in the US, but it enables companies to get in, but they're not fully in charge of the trial, and therefore the costs and everything are much lower, and also you have access to charities and other funding which you wouldn't have otherwise. So I think one has to be a little bit creative, but I would argue that for what we're doing in proof of concept, you don't need many patients. You're certainly talking about well less than 10. I mean, if you did, say, an escalating dose of 3, 3, and 3, that would be a great start. You should be able to do that on 1 million, maybe 2 million.
Another challenge to add to this, I'm listening to you and I appreciate your comments very much. About whether we should develop the product prior to whether we should continue after phase 1 if there's not some indication of evidence. These are experiments or studies. We don't know the result. The other challenge that we're facing right now is the transition out of the not-for-profit into the for-profit. I do not know about this hybrid in America.
Yeah, I don't know either, I'm sorry.
Everyone's arm's length on either side.
Mm.
And the group that's developed the GMP manufacturing, done the preclinical work, I think a significant part of that group should carry on into the clinical side.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And there are barriers to that for conflict of interest,
Mm.
et cetera. How to pull license out of the not-for-profit. In our instance, we're so close to the not-for-profit.
So this is a not-for-profit, you're not talking about an academic institution.
In our case, it's a research institution, not-for-profit.
Right.
No, the arm's length thing is a real problem in the US, and I do take that on board. I mean, the other thing is, there's nothing to stop you developing it in places where it is slightly more friendly to developing it using that. So CCRM example in Canada or Cell Therapy Catapult in the UK are very happy to help develop therapies that are discovered elsewhere. I mean, you don't have to necessarily do it in the US. I think the world is a very non-level playing field. I think you have to take advantage of that and look at countries where there is funding to do these trials. I think, just to go back to the phase 1, I think for me, given the fact that you really got to get very high efficacy, if you can't show something in that phase 1 study, you've either designed the study poorly, or it doesn't work, I would argue, because the regulators are really good on this in letting us do these dose escalating studies. And really, you should have enough animal data to support safety to be able to get your cell or gene to a level where you would expect to see something. I'm not saying you're going to see a full cure, but you're going to see something. And I think if you're not seeing something and you've designed the study right, then chances are it's not going to work, and it's certainly not going to work at a level that would enable it to be a product that can be reimbursed at the level of a level that would be appropriate for a high cost of goods product.
So to my mind, that is where the risk is, whether it's going to show efficacy of man, independent of the animal work.
Yeah.
It's hard to make an argument for funding when it's unclear whether there will be positive efficacy in there in phase 1 safety.
It is hard, I agree.
Thank you very much for that comment. Syed, I'd like to ask you, what is the greatest obstacle you guys have overcome in the process that you're in right now?
I would say for the current product, again, it's what I said. It was the commercialization of the process, taking a cell culture type product and turning that into a process that has SOPs, and we can bring people in. Most of the people that we have working in our clean rooms excuse me, have bachelor's degrees in science. So we're not, it's not a lower level high school graduate, but at the same time, bring somebody in and going through this stepwise process. When you're working with different donors and biologics, which are inherently variable, that was a challenge. It took us about a year to get there.
I would say that the biggest challenges are time. It's really hard to estimate how long it's going to take. Even if you have got the science well sorted and you're on development, the clinical trials pathway is always slow. It's always got, there's something missing in the paperwork or something. Time is a really hard one. But I think the other one is just lack of people. There is a lack of good people at the moment to do this. I think there is a lot of great science that's potentially could be super therapies for patients. I think the funding pool is actually not bad, both non-dilutional and VC. I think where the challenge lies is trying to assemble a team to actually take it out of the university, and I think that's where the real problem lies, is there just isn't the people around. They've been sucked up by these companies which are growing very quickly, and the pool of people was small. Gene therapy has not been an area which a lot of people have trained in over the last 20 years because it just wasn't working. And so there was a very limited pool of people, and the people that were have now been sucked away by the bigger entities and the big pharma. And so that has left us a big problem is how do you move the therapy forward if you haven't got great people to actually help do the translation. So I think if you can get the right people, you're a long way towards getting it done, and that often will pull the financing because that's what's delaying them.
I think one of the things that we're really starting to see here in the U.S. now is we're seeing these incubator groups that come out and really facilitate and help you bring people together to work through some of these things with experience. A lot of times the semi-retired type people, but they've been through it. They have the gray hair or the no hair, and that's been very helpful as well. So we're seeing that a lot. I
think that's right. I think though that things are changing quite quickly. There's been some good talks. There was a gene editing talk where the prof sitting at the front were really honest, and they said, well, not really sure how this editing technology works. The troops in the lab just got on with it and do it. And I have a feeling we're getting to a point where the young guys, the smart guys, it's going to be like computer programming. They can play tunes with the genes, and I think that they're really grasping and getting hold of these very clever gene editing technologies and just running with them. And so I think we're having a whole new generation of people who will be able to do an amazing thing with the cells. But those guys we've got to somehow nurture and somehow bring forward and bring into the commercial space. And they can be challenged. They're going to be like app writers. And I think we really are moving in that direction now. And the grey-haired guys, I'm not so sure that we really know what these guys are thinking and how they're doing it. They're just very smart young kids.
Oh, I think that goes with every industry.
Yeah, but we haven't seen up till now. The grey-haired bods have been very much giving the direction. This is what we do with the stem cell. This is what we're. And I think now that it's moving on, and I think that the troops in the lab now are really getting very innovative what they can do with some of these new technologies, because it's more like it is closer to computer programming than what we've been doing now, struggling with the cells. They're playing tunes, being able to edit the genes, and getting remarkable changes in the cells. So I think we're going to see some phenomenal therapies coming out over the next 5-10 years.
Nice. I have a question.
Yeah,
Connie, we've talked a little bit about coming out of medicine. Any comments?
No, I agree with you. I think
Thank you.
you're right. I mean, if you have to pay back the patent costs to date, that is a big chunk of any small amount of money you raise from a seed fund or something like that, and it kills you. I couldn't agree more. I think that is a big challenge. I think the unions do have to get a little bit more creative on how they license things out. I think they also have to get a lot faster at how they do it. I think they're quite slow in terms of actually getting all the paperwork sorted and done. So I think there's a few lessons there, but yeah, I agree in principle.
Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, it is a big problem because the expenses are enormous. But having said that, it's also critically important, especially when you're out trying to get funding, because most funding groups, especially a VC group, if you're to that level, one of the first things they're going to do is look at your IP and say, if we take this thing and spend all this money doing it, are we going to be able to protect it? So it's a difficult situation to get through and make sure that you have enough IP to get investors to come in and not bankrupt your business trying to prosecute all your patents.
I agree.
Question? Yes.
On top of patents, could you give me a hierarchy of best bankers about countries that restrict your patent the size of the U.S.? You know, probably we talk about Canada, Europe, Japan, maybe Korea. What are your suggestions there? How would you?
Oh, well, for cell and gene, I think you would certainly do North America, Europe, and Japan. You must do Japan. Outside of that, I probably wouldn't do any more because you're really looking about reimbursement potential. And so you need countries or areas of the world that will enable you to get reimbursed. The reason I would do Japan is because there is now this potential for generating data in the US or elsewhere in the world that shows safety and potential efficacy, or ideally efficacy, and then be able to do a very small bridging study, probably 6 patients in Japan, and at that point be able to get conditional approval with reimbursement. So for a small company, that is brilliant. So, 2 years from starting out on your proof of concept in-man study, you could actually be getting reimbursed in Japan. Now, there's nowhere else in the world I know you can do that. I know you can get cost recovery in the US, but cost recovery is dangerous because that sort of tells them about your cost of goods. Where in Japan, you've then got 7 years where you can sell your product as conditionally approved with your full reimbursement before you've got to give your final data in to actually get the final approval. Now, the Japanese are very smart. They'll actually let you manufacture outside Japan for that period as well. And so you could be manufacturing here in the US. At the same time, that same facility could be then manufacturing for your phase 2 or pivotal study, depending on what you're going to do, and you're getting money back from Japan the whole time because of your product you're selling. So it's a no-brainer. So that's the reason I would definitely put Japan in, run Japan with your other studies in parallel. And we know this works. We saw Mesoblast file for Prochymal. So Prochymal is a mesenchymal stem cell product for graft versus host. It's not approved fully anywhere in the world, but it's got humanitarian approval in, I think, New Zealand, Canada, and now has conditional approval in Japan after about, I think it took them 4 or maybe 6 months to go from putting the paperwork in to getting to a point where they're reimbursed. And they're reimbursed at $10,000 a treatment, and it's $100,000 for the full course of 10. So it's an appropriate level of reimbursement. So they're getting money back now. If you're a small company, that's wonderful. To have a therapy going out, getting fully reimbursed in Japan, you're building up experience with the product, you're building up clinician experience, but more importantly, you're also building up the health technology assessment, so you know how well the product's working. So when you come back to discuss with the CMS, you've also got data for that. So it's really almost something for nothing. In fact, it's more than nothing. You're actually getting paid very early on. So yeah, why would I do Europe? I think you have to do Europe. It's a fragmented market. You do get central approval in Europe. The challenge is that each member state has its own reimbursement strategy, and that has proven to be a great problem. But I think that if you are thinking about a therapy that ultimately you're going to get big pharma to maybe take on, that's probably where you're going to go, they're going to expect Europe to be covered.
Thank you.
I think, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I would.
Those are the only two I would add, Canada and Australia,
Canada.
probably because of the size of the market. You obviously need to think ahead about where you're going to go first with this technology. You want to be sure that you protect it in those areas from the onset. And working with your IT groups, there's a lot of different ways where you can put in one application and it covers several countries,
Yeah,
like
PCT.
like European Union. There's other ways to do that, but it's not cheap.
Thank you. That was a very good question. Any other questions from the audience? I think from the NIH, did you have a question a few minutes ago? Or did we cover that? Jennifer? Okay. I saw your hand.
One of the things that is just thinking of a lot of the questions that we get, right, is just where to start, right? How do you meet those, you're saying, right, you do need a good team with a breadth of types of experience and expertise. So how do you even, you have a great idea, how do you start to find those people? And I think, as I mentioned, incubators definitely are one place, and certainly a lot of universities are starting to have a lot of programs and kind of commercialization assisted groups. But I'd like to hear your perspective. I mean, obviously we have our own thoughts on those things.
You hit the two that I would have talked about. I mean, an incubator, your Office of Technology Commercialization or Transfer, if you're in an academic institution, certainly here in the U.S., they've gotten a lot better now over the last probably 5 to 10 years. They've had this huge accumulation of technology that they've just been sitting on. And so now they're out actively trying to sell this technology and looking to do that. So that's helpful. And then, of course, you can never do away with just a kind of serendipity where a person comes up and wants to get involved. Like we had happen, it's kind of a long story, but they met on a trip to China, said, this sounds great, I've been looking to invest, and you never know how it's going to start.
I would suggest that as an academic, you want to get a mentor. So I think that's absolutely crucial, or a couple of mentors, one from academia and one from the commercial world. And I've always found that it's pretty successful. I mean, I've helped a number of my friends and colleagues to make introductions to CEOs of companies who are happy, they're running successful biotechs, but they're also interested in giving something back, and a lot of them are prepared to actually put in time and act as a mentor. It's got to be a great project, but if you haven't got a great project, don't bother anyway. So I think you need a mentor within academia, someone who's done it, who knows the pitfalls of developing something in academia, but you really also want someone from the commercial world who's prepared to give you, not very much, a few hours a month initially, just to act as a sounding board. And I've never had a difficulty persuading people to act as mentors for others. It's their way of giving back, and I recommend that.
Jerry?
You mentioned the shortage of finding the right people.
That's a
When you're establishing, especially a small company that has a great idea, what I find interesting about this industry is the collaboration that takes place, because there aren't enough experts that you can hire. Do you find yourself just, instead of hiring full-time people, to say, I want to partner with another organization and collaborate with another organization? And what is your experience with the collaboration with somebody else that may have a whole career in an area that you need their expertise for a short period of time? So can you talk about the collaboration?
Yeah, that is a really good question at this moment in time. The world is changing. So I would have told you, if I was sitting here a year ago, that we are a highly collaborative collection in the cell therapy space. That is no longer the case. People now, not necessarily the scientists believe it themselves, but their IP departments and tech transfers are saying, this is patentable, do not talk. You just cannot get help from other academic groups now. We're all very siloed. It's incredibly sad, but absolutely true. So just simple help. What sort of volume of media do I need to use to grow a T cell? Forget it. No one's going to tell you. I would also go as far to say that a lot of the stuff that's published in papers is very, very hard to reproduce. There's just not enough information in those peer-reviewed publications. People have become very closed, and the reason for that is everybody sees their gene therapy as the next bluebird, next billion-dollar company. They're not going to be, but that's the perception. And so we have a very closed world. So trying to get people to collaborate and share data now has got much, much harder. It's a tragedy. The other thing is that a lot of this has got no IP on it. It's impossible to actually get IP on it. You can get an AAV vector from NIH, you can get the license for $10,000, and you're away. you know, we can both then do a therapies for, say, Gaucher's disease. There's no IP. It's really all about speed to getting those clinical trials done, getting your orphan drug status, and getting your market exclusivity. And so knowledge is everything now, you know, trade knowledge, trade secrets. And again, that's preventing people sharing data and information. So we have a big change, especially in the last 12 months on the cell and gene companies, really wishing to retain everything they possibly know. Because to be fair to them, there is a lot of value there and there's no way you can patent it. But it is causing problems in terms of academic collaborations.
Can you use like confidential agreements so that they have a piece of the puzzle, so there's an incentive for them to help you with just a small piece of it?
There's very small little twists and turns that make a big difference at this moment in time, and that's the problem. I mean, it really is a very big land grab going on, and I think people are very cautious. Either you've got people who can do it and they're with you, or that's the only way you're going to do it. They're not going to be shared.
Okay.
And it's stopping people using CMOs as well. People are very cautious about CMOs and osmosis of their knowledge between different projects.
I think we're coming to a close. I hear the bell out in the hall. I would like to add one thing, another funding source, benefunder.org. They spoke here last year, and I'm going to read what they have on their website. It says, Benefunder is fueling innovation by allowing donors to fund causes that matter to them. They facilitate connections with today's top researchers who are working on breakthrough discoveries that are impacting the world. They are working very closely with an organization in San Diego called Connect. And so what they're doing, besides trying to get donors to donate money that go directly to the researchers, they're actually working with large corporations to make connections for the researchers who are working on the molecules or the technology, so that then they know which company to go to for potential exit or acquisition or
you
merger.
can't do that,
So
yeah.
benefunder.org is something that I think it would be beneficial for all of you to check out. I would like to thank Chris and Cy for participating on the panel today, and all of you for participating. Thank you for the questions and the comments.
Yeah, really good.
And thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you.